So before we get started at looking at any of the code, we're just going to discuss a bit about auto layout. So what is auto layout in general? Like, what do we use it for? And yeah, what is it? So when we look at auto layout and we look at Apple's documentation, they say auto layout dynamically calculates the size and position of all the views in your view hierarchy based on constraints placed on those views. So Apple developer says this about auto layout. And the best way to think about auto layout is it's something that you use to basically, like it says, place elements on the screen. But predominantly you want to basically think about it in a way that, like, if I place this box on the screen, I can place it to the top left, right, bottom, or even in the center. So when we look at auto layout, and if we look at use an example such as this black box, we can actually apply constraints onto this box. So what are constraints? So constraints basically allow us to basically tell the system where we want to place a view. So with this black box, we could basically give it a top constraint. We could also give it a bottom constraint, and we could also give it a trailing constraint, and then so also give it a leading constraint. So when looking at these constraints, top would obviously be top, trailing would be the right, bottom would be the bottom, and leading would be the left. But these aren't the only constraints that we can apply onto views. We can also apply different types of constraints. So another constraint we could apply onto this box is vertical or horizontal. So if we wanted to center a view on the screen, we could give it a vertical constraint and a horizontal constraint. But we could even take this one step further. We can even look at this box that's 50 by 50, and we can even give it a specified height and width. So we could give it a height of 50 points, which would also be a constraint. And we could also give it another constraint, which is 50 points as well. So by giving it a height and a width constraint of 50, you get this 50 by 50 box. But how do we apply auto layout to really complex views? Well, the best way to do this is to break down these views into smaller components. So let's look at our view that we're going to be building. So we've got our view here with Arsenal, and as you can see, we have the badge on the top left-hand corner. We have the titles after that on the right-hand side with the title of the team, founded, manager, and information about the club. And also as well, we have the button that we're going to use to basically play the chants. So the best way to tackle stuff like this is to not get overwhelmed and look at it straight away, and instead to basically break it down and visualize what components do you think you'll need to use to build this view. So let's do that now with this as an example. So the first one we're going to need is a container. So we've obviously got our white box. So this container is going to hold everything in the box for us. And now what we need to do is we need to basically think, okay, how are we going to lay out the title, founded, current manager, and information label? And you want to basically do this easily and quickly. So in the future, let's say, for example, if we want to add a new label in between Arsenal and founded, we don't want to basically have to reconfigure all the constraints on that view. And to do that, we can use a control in iOS called UIStatView. So what UIStatView is basically a control that allows you to lay out views either horizontally or vertically. So just to show you an example, we can actually basically say with the UIStatView within this container, we want to basically position it 8 from the top and bottom 8 as well. So what we're going to say here is we want to basically push the stat view from the top by 8, and we want to basically pull it up from the bottom by 8 as well. And the reason why we need to use this top and bottom is so that we basically get the dynamic heights of the table view cell. So depending on the content that you put inside the stat view, the cell will basically change its height automatically, so it's not always fixed. But just quickly going back to the stat views, what we'll basically then say is we want to add a label in the stat view. So if you look at the example here and you compare it to the example on the left, you'll see that the labels in the stat view are positioned downwards, similar to the labels on the right. So we can actually change the direction of this if we wanted to and do them horizontally where they're all stacked side by side, but that doesn't fit our design that we've been given. So now that we've done this, if we wanted to, we could easily insert a new label into the stat view, and the table view cell will grow as the stat view increases with the elements inside of it. And don't worry about this. In the next part of the video, I'll show you an actual example of this in practice, and we'll also use the UI debugger to basically see how the UI lays these controls out. But besides that, let's look at how we'll lay out our other controls. So we've also got a image view and a button, which is the play button. So what we want to do is we want to basically pin the badge or the image with a UI image view. So a UI image view is a control that allows you to basically put images in a view. So with this UI image view, what we're going to say is we're going to give it a height of 50 and a width of 50 as well, so that all are consistent height. We're also going to pin it to the top of this stat view. That way, we basically make sure that the UI image view is always aligned to the top of the stat view, giving it the effect you can see on the left. And then what we're going to say is we're going to basically give it some trailing. So we're going to say from the right hand side, let's add some space to the left hand side of the stat view. And then finally, what we're going to say is you want to basically push the UI image view from the left hand side of the container. So that's the best way to break that down. And as you can see here, I'm hoping that you're starting to visualize and see how we're going to tackle the constraints for this cell. But we still have one more control, and that's the play button. So let's see how we tackle that. So with the play button, we're going to basically use a UI button. And with UI button, it basically gives us a property where we can set the image on the button. Using the images, you can basically like toggle it and whatnot. But in this case, we're going to use SF symbols, which I'll talk about either in this video or the next video. So with this button, we're going to give it a height of 44 by 44. And if you follow the Apple Human Interface Guidelines, which is basically Apple's Bible in terms of what you need to do in terms of UX, they actually recommend that the minimum size for buttons is 44 by 44 pixels. So let's just follow these guidelines. And then also with this UI button, what we're going to do is we're going to basically give the stat view some trailing space to the left hand side of this button. And we're also going to say to the button, we want to give it some trailing space to the right hand side of the container, so it pushes it away from the right. Finally, what we need to do is we want to always center this button in the middle of this container view. So we're basically going to give it a center Y constraint as well. And that way the button will always be in the middle of the container view. Now that was a lot of constraints that we just went through. But if you actually think about what we did, we actually tackled each component individually one by one. And I'd highly recommend you go back and watch each step that we just discussed so you can see my thought process behind it, and you can apply the same thought process as well. And also as well, sometimes it's good just to visualize this stuff, because some controls and some components and some designs are not that straightforward to go with. So later on in this video, we'll actually apply all these constraints that I've just discussed here to our actual cell, and you'll see how we do this in code. But just moving on, if you ever want to get better at building UI, I would highly recommend you just basically just practice. Practice makes perfect. So I'd recommend you going on websites such as Dribbble, Behance, and just looking at apps on the App Store, and basically just see the UI that people have built, and just try and recreate it yourself. And you don't have to build anything with code and make the next Twitter or Snapchat or whatever. It just needs to be a static view so you can get used to writing AutoLayout programmatically. So check out the links in the description box for these sites, and just basically challenge yourself to build some of the UI. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to tackle that table view cell that we've broken up into different components and the AutoLayout, and we're actually now going to apply that in code. We create that model. What we need to do is, because obviously we can't change this, we need to delete this. So bye Felicia. And since we just discussed in the previous graphic how we're actually going to tackle building this cell, let's start to put that into practice now and build our table view cell for this. So what we need to do is we need to create a new folder again, and this time I'm going to call this folder views, because we're going to hold all our views, so our table view cell. And then what we're going to do is go hit right click, new file, Cocoa Touch class, and then we're going to change this to UI table view cell. Yeah. And then what we're going to do here is we're actually going to call this table view cell team table view cell, and then hit create. All right, cool. And then just to remove this, I'm going to remove this stuff because we don't actually need to use it. It's just boilerplate. And the first thing we need to create here is our ID for this cell. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a static let cell ID is equal to this. So if you're probably wondering what static let is, if you've not come across that before, so what static let lets us do is it lets us actually access this property without having to initialize this object. So we can just do team. So we could just do team table view cell. And we can just well, this isn't going to work, but just to show you, so team table view cell dot cell ID. So we can just do that in another file, which is what you'll see in a minute. And then what we need to do now is we actually need to build our UI for the whole table view cell. So like we discussed in the graphic, we're going to basically tackle this by creating a stack view first with labels inside of it, and then we're going to have a UI image here, and then this is going to be a UI button to the right. So what we need to do is build the UI, and it's quite a bit of UI. So let's take our time with this and discuss how we're going to tackle this. So we're going to do mark, just to make this clean and separate, because it's going to be quite a long UI. So we're going to do mark UI. And when I'm tackling stuff like this, I like to group UIs together so I can see them ones that are all related to one another. So the first set of UI that we're just going to build is the container view. So the container view being this view that has the corner radius on it and the background color. So let's just build that. So I'm just going to type in here private lazy var container view. Just type UI view equals this, and then we'll do this, and I'm just going to create a view. UI view translate false, and you can see I've added that, which is really important. Like I said in the previous videos, that you need to add translates auto resizing mask into constraints, and then make sure you set that to false. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to basically create our stack view. So private lazy var, and we're just going to call this content stack view. Again, just go to stack view and UI stack view. And again, translate auto. So long saying that every single time, man, but basically translates auto resizing mask into constraints. Finally got there. And then on the stat view, we've got to set some spacing. So spacing between these elements in the stat view, we're going to set that to 4. And then axes is vertical because we want it to be laid out like so, going down. And then we're going to say dot vertical, and then we're going to return the start view. Okay, cool. And then what I just want to do is I want to just show you these stat views first, and then we'll do the badges in a minute and the button. So it's just to show you the stat view. So what we're going to do is just go create all the labels that we need. So let's do that. So the first one we're going to create is the name label, which is the first one here. And then we're going to set the number of lines to 0. So the reason why we set this to 0 is because if we leave this by default, it's set to 1. And if you do that, then what will happen is if it's more than 1 lines, the text, then it will actually cut the text off and you'll have the ellipses at the bottom. Now obviously you can see here, we don't know how long this content is going to be. So by setting this to 0, it will basically span onto as many lines as it needs to. So that's just a little tip with UI labels. And then next thing you want to do is you want to basically set the font for this label. So I'm just going to choose a generic system font of 10, and then we're going to set the weight to light for the name. Oh, sorry, not light. We're going to set that to bold. Looking at designs, that's wrong. So we're going to set this to bold, and then we're going to set this to 18. My bad. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the text color to white, and then we're going to return the label. So as you can see here, we've got one, two, three more labels. So I'm just going to copy and paste this 3 times, and we're just going to tweak each one. So this is going to be the founded label, and then we're going to leave that number of lines to 0. We're going to change the font size and weight though. So we're going to change this to 12, and we're going to leave this and change it to, not leave it, so we're going to change this to light. And then we're going to select the current manager. So we're going to work on the current manager. So we're going to create a, because that can be any type, so it can be manager or head coach. So we're going to call this job label because we don't specify the job. And then we're going to change this to 10. And then we're going to leave it light. And then the last one is the information. So we're going to create an info label. And then we're going to change this to 12 and then dot medium. Okay, cool. So now we have all our UI set up for the labels. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to basically put this in a stack view, so I can just show you how stack views work and how the rows will basically expand based on their content. So in order to do that, what we need to do first of all is we're not actually going to integrate the view model just yet. Advice for me to you is that when I build cells, I like to just see it with dummy data to make sure the UI is all good before actually working with real data or legit data. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up our table view cell to just work with some dummy data for now, and then when it looks all good, we will then replace it with the data from the actual view model. So let's do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new function called configure. I'm not going to pass anything just yet, but when we actually do set everything up, we will actually pass in the data from our view model. So for now, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to basically give this container view. So we're going to give this container view a background color. And I don't know if you remember in the previous video, if you watched it. So in the previous video about, I can't remember the title of the video, but in the previous video of the assets, that's what it was, the assets. Where I spoke about using the extensions and the enums. We're just basically going to use that in play now. So we're going to basically say teamtype.arsenal.badge, background, and we're basically going to use the background color of the Arsenal case. So if I just go into this, just click into it, you can see here the background color for Arsenal is this color asset here. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to basically set up the labels. So I'm just going to say name label.text is equal to Arsenal. And then we're going to say founded label.text is equal to 1800s. Now you can put anything you want to put in here. It's just dummy data just to see if the UI looks good. And then on job label, we're going to use our enum. So we're just going to say here, we're going to do some string interpolation. So if you just do the / and then open the parentheses, and then what we're going to do in here is we're going to say job type actually, no, let's leave that. I'll treat you guys with that later. Let's leave that for now. So what we're going to do instead, we're just going to do current manager dot the semicolon, then we will say this is Mikel Arteta. If you're an Arsenal fan, Arteta out. So info label.text. We're just going to use some Lorem Ipsum, and I've got that here on the side of my screen. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. So you can go onto the internet, or just put in any old data in here. It's up to you. So we're just going to do that. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our container view as the first view. So self.contentView dot add subview container view. Yeah. And then what we're going to do in our container view, which is this container which is holding all our elements, we're going to basically add our stack view. So in container view dot add subview, and then we're going to add our content stat view. So content stat view, cool. And then in our content stat view, we're going to basically add these individual labels. So let's say content stat view dot add a range subview, and then we're going to add the name label, and I'm just going to copy and paste this 4 times. So we're going to add the name label, we're going to add the founded label, we're going to add the manager label, or the job label I should say, and we're going to add the info label. So what we've done here is we've added the container view onto the into the cell, and then within the container view we've added the stat view, which you'll see here, and then the label view. Now, so you can see this clearly, I'm going to basically use the UIDebugger so we can actually see this with a proper visual representation. And also the UIDebugger is really good for debugging UI and seeing where components are, but we're just going to carry on setting this up for now. So the next thing that we need to do is actually add our views onto the screen. So let's work on doing that now. So let's do that. So what I'm just going to do is add the container view, and then we're just going to pin the stat view to the top, left, right, and bottom. So we're going to do ns layout constraint dot activate, and then we're going to add our container view to be pinned to all edges. So container, spell that wrong, yep. So container view dot top anchor dot constraint equal to self dot content view. Really important you add this to the content view. Dot top anchor. So I just realized a mistake there. So this should say self.content view. Yeah, so this should be content view, my bad. So on line 75, you want to change this to content view, or else it'll crash. So yeah, and then let's now add this to the top, left, right, and bottom. So we'll go to the bottom anchor. Leading anchor, trailing anchor, and we're just going to separate these out with commas. Cool. So now we need to add the constraints for our content stat view. So let's do that now. So content stat view. And what I'm actually going to do is I might actually, to save myself time, just copy and paste this because it's very similar. So we're going to add a comma there, and we're going to change this to content stat view. So a little trick, if you just do, if you just hold down Alt on your keyboard, hold your mouse and then drag, so Alt, and then if you hold down, oh, why am I doing it? So I'm actually gonna edit this part out of the video. So what we're gonna do is just rename this to content start view. Cool. And then in this bit here, we don't actually want to constrain this to the content view, because this content stat view is within the container view. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to change this to container view. So container view. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some spacing. So we just got to add another parameter here, constants 8. And then on the bottom, we don't want to push it down, we want to drag it up by 8. So we're going to do negative. So when you're working with bottom, if you want to move it up from the bottom, you have to make it a negative. Leading, we want to push it from the left by 8 as well. And then trailing, we want to drag it from the right. So we don't want to push it to the right, we want to drag it from the right. So we're going to give it a negative as well. We should drag it. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to add in this cell to our list. So let's work on doing that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the view controller and I'm going to register this cell that we created before. So we're going to register this cell here. So I'm just going to do tv.register, and then we're going to use this one here. And then we're going to do, we're just going to do, I forgot what the file's called. So we're going to do team table view cell. And then we're going to type in .self. And we're going to use that static property that we created before, cell ID. And we're just going to tweak this a tiny bit. So return 1, we just want to see one cell for now. And then now what we're going to do is we're actually going to create that cell. So we're going to use the ID again, the static identifier. This time we need to cast the cell as that type. So we're going to say as team table view cell. And then we need to call the configure function so it lays out the cell. And then we're going to return the cell. Cool. So let's delete all this stuff because we don't need it no more. Let's run and see what happens. Ta-da! So you can see here how we have our cell set up now. We have the name, founded, label, value here. We have the current manager, and we just have some random dummy text here as well. And if we just use the UIDebugger to look into this, so we just click on this icon here called Debug View Hierarchy. Just click on that. What you'll see is all the UI elements on the left-hand side. And you can actually see when I hover over it, it's actually selecting the UI. So if you just click on the side and you just drag across, you can see here that I'm seeing all the possible layers. And I can actually zoom it out here at the bottom as well with the same effect. And I can use this to zoom in onto the screen. So let's break this down. So you can see here, this red, like I said before, this red view here is our container view. So you can see here in the UI view here. And if you actually click on this, you can actually see the stack view and all the labels as well. So if you go to the next component, it's actually the stack view. So you can see how the stack view is within inside that container, and it has the if you click on this icon here, it has all the constraints. And if you click on the label, you can see how the label is, all the labels are laid out here within the stat view. So this is a really good tool here to see where your auto layout might be messing up. I would highly recommend, like, if you ever need to find out where a view controller is or how a view is being laid out, to always use the UIDebugger here. So what we're going to do is we're just basically going to get out of this view here, and we're now actually going to build up the rest of the view with the badge and the button. So let's just cancel this. Okay, so let's carry on. And now let's start to actually set up the rest of the table view cell with the remaining controls. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add the button and the image. So let's go back to our table view cell. And we're just going to scroll to the top here. And then underneath content stat view, let's add our badge. So we're just going to do private lazy bar, and then badge image view, and then UI image view. And then within here, we will say let is equal to UI image view. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to use my favorite word, translate auto resizing mask into constraints, and set that to false. And then what we're going to do here is we're actually going to set the content mode for the image to be aspect ratio fit. So what this basically means is if you have a box and it's 50 by 50, you'll actually try and fit the image within that box so it won't overflow, and then we try and maintain the same aspect ratio of the image so it doesn't look stretched, it looks just right. So we're going to return this image view. And then next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our button. So let's create our playback button. So our playback button. And then we're just going to call this, we're just going to use the UI button class to basically just create this playback button. And then what to add? There's equals there that we forgot to add. So remember to add equals there. So let button, UI button, and then we're going to set the tint color for this button to white, because if you go back into the Football Chance app, you can see that this button here is white. So let's set the tint color to white, and then let's return this button. Okay, cool. So the next thing we need to do is actually add the badges and the buttons onto the screen. So let's go down here, and we don't want to add this button or badge into our stat view. We want to add it to the container. So on the container, let's put some space to separate it. So on the container, let's add the badge image view, and then let's also add the button as well. So add view playback button. Cool. So now that we've done this, we're going to tweak some of our constraints a bit now, because obviously we need to put the button on this side here, and we need to put the we need to put the badge on this side here, I should say, at the top of the label, and we need to also add the button as well into the center, and then pin it to the left and right hand side of this stat view as well. So first of all, let's tackle the badge, and then we'll tackle the image. So with the constraints that we're going to do, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to delete what we had previously so we can start fresh, and you can sort of see my thinking and in the graphic that I displayed to you before how we're going to tackle this. So let's just do badge image view dot height anchor dot constraint. So we're going to give the badge image view a height first. So we want to give it a height of 50. And then we also want to give it a width of 50. So it's, like I said before, we want it to be 50 by 50. And then it will maintain the aspect ratio fit inside of it. So constraint equal to 50. And then what we want to do is we want to pin the badge to the top of this label here. Oh, so I used the wrong one. So it should be equal to constant. So you want to just change that to equal to constant. Both of them. So what we want to do now is we want to basically pin it to the top. So badge image view dot top anchor, and then we want to constrain this to the top of the stack view. So let's say constraint equal to content stack view dot top anchor, and then we want to basically pin this to the left hand side of the container view. So we're going to say badge image view dot leading dot constraint equal to the container views dot leading, and we want to add some space as well. So we've got to add 8 spacing. Cool. So that's the badge sorted. So like I showed in the graphic, I like to work from left to right when I'm working with controls. So the next control we need to lay out is the stat view. So let's do that. So let's do the content stat view and add the constraints back in that we need this time. So content stat view, we're going to say we want this to be to the top of the container. So we want this to be to the top of the container, but we want to push this down by 16 points. So equal to container view dot top anchor, and we're going to push this down by 16 points. And then what we want to do is we want to pin the stat view to the bottom, so it basically expands depending on its content, like I said in the graphic before. So content stat view dot bottom anchor dot constraint equal to container view, not that, so container view dot bottom anchor. And then we want this one because we want to basically not push this below, we want to drag it from the bottom. So we're going to say -16 from the bottom. And then what we want to do here is we want to basically add the leading. So we want this to be spaced from the badge. So content stat view dot leading dot constraint equal to the badges trailing. So from the badges right hand side, we want to add 8 spacing. So the spacing here between these two components. And then we want to add some spacing between this and the button. So let's do that now. So content stat view dot trailing anchor dot constraint equal to the playback button dot leading, so the left hand side of the button, and we want to drag this back by 12, or let's just do 8, because in my example 12 looks like a lot, so let's just do 8. And then what we want to do is we want to do the playback button now. So we want to do playback button, and then we want to give it a height and width of 40 by 40. So in Apple's human interface guidelines, they actually recommend 44. So actually, let's be good guys here, good guys and good gals, and just do 44. So we do 44 by 44 just to make it a tiny bit bigger than what I've done. So constraint to 44, and then what we're gonna do now is we're gonna basically say that we want this button to be 8 away. So we want to pull it 8 away from the right hand side this way. So we're going to say playback button dot trailing dot constraint equal to the container view dot trailing, and we're going to pull this back by 8. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do playback button, and we're to center it in the middle. So center it on the y-axis. We're going to say center y is constraint equal to the container views center y. Cool. So there's still a few more things we need to do. So we actually need to set some things, just some default stuff in this button and the and in this badge. So at the top here, let's give the badge a image. So let's say badge image view dot image is equal to arsenal type dot arsenal dot badge, and then let's say So let's say we'll also give this an image. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to say Playback Button dot set image, and what we're going to use here is SF symbols. So basically, starting from iOS 13, Apple released an app and a new feature called SF symbols, which are essentially just scalable vector assets. So if you go onto the internet and you just search for SF symbols app, you should see an app that looks like this when you open it up. So SF symbols, and you get all these symbols that you can use that are actually built into the iOS lifecycle, or not lifecycle, in the iOS kind of world of apps. So you can just kind of use these icons. So the one that we want to use is play. So I'm just going to search for play. We want to use this one here. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to right click and copy the name of it, and then we're actually going to reference it here. So we're going to say UI image, and then we're going to use, we scroll all the way down, we'll see we'll see an initializer with system name compatible with, with configuration. We want to use that one, and then the name is going to be what we copied here, and then the configuration is going to be UI image dot symbol configuration, and then we're going to create the initializer point size, and we're going to put 32, and then for state we're just going to say normal. So what this is going to do is going to basically create this symbol, and like I said before, they're just scalable fonts, and it's going to basically give it a size of 32 points, as you can see. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to run this and see what we get, and then we'll do a bit more tweaking to make it look like this. Okay, it's looking better. It's looking a lot better. So what we need to do now is we need to basically push this container, and then we need to add a corner radius. So let's do that next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the table view cells kind of life cycle functions. I'm just going to do mark life cycle. I'm going to go do layout subviews. So when the view's been laid out, what we're going to do is we're going to set the corner radius of the container. So we're going to say container view dot layer dot corner radius is equal to I can't remember what I used, so I'm pretty sure it's 8. Nope, it's not, it's 10. So 10, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to push this container from the left and right, and we're going to give it some space top and bottom so we can add some separation between each cell. So in here we're going to say constant, we're going to give it 8 top, and then on the bottom we're going to give it 8 spacing as well, so 8 on the bottom as well. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to push it from the left by 8, and then we're going to push it by the right, push it from the right, we'll pull it from the right by 8 as well. So let's stop this and let's run it again. Cool, looks a lot better. So you can see we're starting to get there now. So it looks a lot like what we've currently got. So I feel like that was a lot in this video. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to stop here, and what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to move on to the next video, which is going to be setting up a navigation controller, and we're just going to basically clean up the colors and start to make this look a bit more like this with the title and whatnot. So I'll see you in the next video, and like, share, subscribe. Deuces.